Welcome back to the show, everyone. It's Dina Kalmeta here, and for today's first video, I'd like to start with this article from Harbinger's Daily. And the headline reads, "For Israel, accepting the Antichrist peace agreement will seem like a no-brainer." The book of Daniel talks about a 7-year period in the earth's future, often called the tribulation. It tells us this terrible time will begin when the Antichrist confirms a covenant or treaty with Israel. You may wonder why the people of Israel would ever do such a thing. The answer is, unfortunately, they will be deceived. 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says that the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. A lie works best on those who must need the lie to be true. Desperation is deception's greatest ally. So it will be with Israel. In fact, we have already seen it. The nation of Israel has longed for peace. In their desperation for peace, they have already been deceived many times, only later to regret their repeated concessions. Right now, Israel must fight for peace. Prime Minister Netanyahu has vowed to destroy Hamas. But no one believes that smashing Hamas will end the threat against Israel. In fact, every time Israel tries to defend themselves, it incites more anger against the nation. We must understand that a final peace for Israel will not be reached until the return of the Prince of Peace. This fact does not mean that Christians should stop working for peace. Jesus gave a special blessing to peacemakers. He is the Prince of Peace. Real steps towards peace alleviate real suffering. Neither the present U.S. administration nor any future one should stop working for peace. Also, as individuals, we must be peacemakers. But even while searching for a path to peace, Israel, like any nation, has the right and obligation to defend itself. But the very actions they have now been forced to take in their own defense creates new and unprecedented levels of hatred against them. Israel's greatest international support has traditionally come from the U.S. But despite the horrors of October 7th, the most recent poll showed that 33% of Americans favor the opposition. That's more than at any time in history. And among Democrats, only 21% now favor Israel, down from 62% during the Gulf War in the early 1990s. That means that Israel no longer has the full support of the United States. And for Israel, that's a disaster. But when a rising European political star one day manages to convince the world that he can bring a just and fair peace to the Middle East, for many in Israel, it will seem like a no-brainer. This man will have charisma like no politician before. The Bible says his powers of deception will flow directly from the devil. He will use Israel's desperation, a desperation growing right now before our eyes, to deceive them. And yet again, Bible prophecy perfectly fits in our times. So I thought that this was a very interesting piece to start the broadcast with. Israel is desperate for peace. They are constantly being attacked, either by words or otherwise. And although this administration is behind them and supports them, there will come a time, and as we've seen in past administrations, that they will not support Israel, which eventually will lead God to defend her himself. And we find that in the book of Ezekiel. Is this rising European political star, otherwise known as the Antichrist, really from Europe? Well, possibly. Nobody really knows. We can guess. We can study our Bibles, but nobody really knows where he's coming from. But we do know that he's going to be a very evil man. And 3.5 years into the tribulation, he will be inhabited by Satan himself. So we need to quadruple that wickedness. Is he alive right now? And I'm going to take an educated guess and just my personal opinion. Yes, I think he's alive right now. I think every generation, the enemy has a quote unquote Antichrist available, because we have to remember, nobody knows the day or hour when Christ will return. So the devil doesn't know. So he's got to have a candidate every generation, because prophecy has to be fulfilled. So yes, I do think he's alive right now. But again, just a very interesting piece. And in fact, Netanyahu today is going to visit President Trump at the White House. So interesting timing. But with that said, let's jump into some other news. The BBC is reporting that Christians have expressed their shock at a council's plan to restrict street preaching. Jamie Brody, an evangelist from Aldershot, says society is tentative to speak about spiritual health. He has reacted to Rushmore's council's proposed injunction to restrict the behavior of people preaching within the town centers of Aldershot and Farnborough. The council has said it does not in any way want to prevent freedom of speech, but it seems that is exactly what they are doing here. Mr. Brody said that this kind of limiting of expression leads to a weaker society. He said he believes that Christians are treated differently to other religions. He also added that there is no equivalent word for this kind of restriction to Christians. It goes on further to report that the council displayed notifications of the application on lampposts across the district. The initial paperwork sent to the court and shared with the BBC showed that the council aims to tackle hostile and nuisance behavior, but made clear that the defendants would still be allowed to place written material on a stand or on the floor for others to take them. The documents showed at least 16 separate complaints reported by local businesses, residents, and market stall holders between October 2023 and November 2024. The claim form said the activities of preachers, who it described as males and females from different backgrounds, have caused harassment, alarm, distress, and a public nuisance, especially with respect to use of a loudspeaker and aggressively approaching members of the public. So very interesting, you guys. But you know what? We knew that this was coming. And in fact, we have already seen it here in the US. And we see a similar issue in China. New regulations released this week by the CCP impose severe restrictions on missionary activity in the country. The regulations, which take effect on May 1st, prohibit foreigners from preaching, sharing their faith, or establishing religious organizations without the official government approval. So they definitely want to control the narrative, you guys. Justifying these regulations, the Chinese state media claimed that the newly revised rules promote national security, a common justification for CCP persecution of religion, and help to protect normal religious activities, referring to activities run under strict government oversight as part of a state-run religious institution. So we knew that China was definitely persecuting Christians on a huge scale. In fact, they're one of the top 50 with open doors for one of the nations that persecutes Christians the most. But now they're affirming that by putting regulations on missionaries. So definitely a sign of the times. The brighter side of news is reporting that scientists are using elephant DNA to bring back the woolly mammoth. The team behind this work, Colossal Biosciences, sees it as a path towards tackling big challenges, preserving endangered animals, and restoring ecosystems, as well as refining genetic tools. So more Frankenstein experiments, you guys. In other news, a deadly mosquito-borne illness is rising in the U.S. Last week, it's been reported that the dengue fever, a mosquito-borne illness common in tropical and subtropical parts of the world, had some 3,500 travelers from the U.S. contract dengue abroad in 2024, and this trend is expected to continue. Express News is reporting that Slovakia has closed 24 borders and introduced strict measures to help prevent the spread of a highly infectious disease. The disease was found in a Hungarian dairy farm close to the Slovakian border, with 1,372 animals at risk. Authorities deployed soldiers and implemented immediate health control measures, including the culling of livestock and introducing a restricted zone. Slovakia confirmed outbreaks on March 21st in farms close to the Hungarian border. This particular disease mostly affects cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, which experience fever and mouth blisters, and an outbreak that often leads to the industry restricting trade and culling livestock. Human contraction is very rare and usually occurs through direct contact with infected animals, and there is no evidence of person-to-person transmission. So this prophecy, again, very interesting, and it actually goes with the prophecy in the book of Hosea chapter 4 verses 1 through 3. In the last days, the Bible prophesies that there will be massive animal death. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. Because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land, by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood toucheth blood. Therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that dwelleth therein shall languish. With the beasts of the field and with the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea shall also be taken away. So because of the sin that's being committed, the swearing, lying, stealing, committing adultery, so on and so forth, God's going to basically take away the animals, and that's what we're seeing right now. So this prophecy is definitely coming to pass. We're also seeing this in Australia. More than 100,000 head of livestock were estimated lost during the flooding in outback Queensland. Early numbers confirmed by the Queensland Department of Primary Industries of 348,000 livestock are missing or deceased. There are an estimated 13.3 million head of cattle, about 2.7 million sheep, and some 713,000 goats in Queensland. And those numbers are expected to increase in coming days. So here we see the Hosea prophecy again. So what happened in Australia? Well, the extent of the floodwaters that have engulfed Queensland over the past fortnight is so widespread it has covered an area more than 4 times the size of the United Kingdom. It's larger than France and Germany combined and is even bigger than Texas. The seemingly endless plains of outback Queensland are so vast and remote as to boggle any attempts to visualize the scale of what is being described as one of the most devastating floods in living memory. The Bureau of Meteorology said on Friday that the flooding had severely impacted more catchments spanning about 1 million square kilometers since prolonged downpours began drenching southwest and central Queensland on March 23rd. The report goes on to say that if the flooding were a country, it would be the 31st largest on Earth. So this thing is massive, you guys. In fact, this article reminds me of the scripture that Jesus spoke about in regards to the days of Noah, the coming of the Son of Man. So basically, we're going to see sights like these, weather phenomenon like this, as it was in the great floods. Now, Jesus isn't going to flood the earth again. He promised that he would never do that. But he did say before his return, we're going to see a lot of flooding, just as it were in the days of Noah. We're going to see a lot of crime, as it were in the days of Noah. We're also going to see these Frankenstein experiments, or the mixing of DNA, as it were in the days of Noah with the Nephilim. What about signs in the heavens? This report from the Western Journal says that sky watchers are scanning the night sky for an explosion that happened 3,000 years ago. A nova called the Blaze Star is expected to soon be visible in the night sky. The pairing of a hot red giant star and a cool white dwarf star is about 3,000 light years away because it explodes every 78 to 80 years, and the last explosion took place in 1946. The next explosion has been expected for months. In April, the constellation that hosts the Blaze Star will rise in the eastern sky 3 hours after the sun sets and be visible about 4 hours after sunset. So there you have it, you guys. Signs in the heavens. In the meantime, Jesus said that we would have earthquakes in diverse places. On April 4th, we had a very strong 6.9 earthquake that hit Papua New Guinea with a threat of hazardous tsunami waves. We had another very strong 6.9 earthquake that hit the Atlantic Ocean on April 3rd. And on April 2nd, we had a 6.3 earthquake that hit the Pacific Antarctica Ridge. Have you noticed, or is it just me, but we're seeing earthquakes get larger and larger in these last days? Like, we hear about the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s, but it's becoming normal to hear about 6s and above. It's just something I've noticed as of recently. But, as always, I'll continue to keep you updated. Please do leave your comments below this video. I'd love to hear from all of you. And stay tuned. I have more news coming up next.